All right, folks. Well, I am in the company of celebrities right here. I'm just saying, hey, it doesn't happen every day on Healthcare Unfiltered. I get celebrities on the show, so I really appreciate and I appreciate you taking the time. We will talk about both of you guys, who you are and what you're doing, and I'm really there's so much to talk about. So very excited to be with you, Russell Gong. First, who are
Full
you?
named, full named.
Who are you?
Well, again, if you were talking about celebrities, you were definitely talking about Eric and yourself. You have two books hovering in the background, and I've got a fuzzy background myself. So again, so excited to be on the channel. My name's Russell or Russ, co-founder, president of Cabinet Health, and I'm excited to share the background. I hand it off to Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, so nice to meet you as well. My name is Eric Lessard. I am the VP of Pharmacy here at Cabinet Health, second generation pharmacist with over 20 years of experience in the industry, and excited to be on and share more.
So, Russ, I think what I want to start by the idea of, there was no cabinet health at some point
Right.
in life. So there was an idea that you came up with, and it was a startup company. What made you think of what you thought about that led to the birth of Cabinet Health?
Mm. Well, you know what I will start with is a lot of founder stories are similar to like how we think about the laws of physics. Like an apple falls from the tree and all of a sudden Newton creates the laws of physics. In reality, we all know that's not true. And so, before I answer your question, I will share a little bit more of my personal background, allow Eric to share his, and one of my co-founders isn't on the phone, which I can share really is the foundation of our company, which is the people behind it. And then I'd love to talk to you, Shadi, about the actual problem, which really inspired how we thought of the birth of the company and where we're going. But to take a big step back, my name's again Russ. I'm a sustainable product specialist as well as a U.S. Army veteran. And personally, before any professional background, I was born and raised in a very, very mission-driven family. My father was a State Department officer for the U.S. My mother was a journalist. So you can imagine dinner time was very focused on how do we make this community better? How do we think about this social problem in a different light? And for me, Shadi, that's how I looked at what family was all about, what my purpose in life was about, and professionally, how that manifested itself is I really wanted to find more of what my family dinner table was like and be able to dedicate my professional career around that. So how that manifested itself is I started my career in state and federal legislatures, really pursuing how do we mobilize communities for big problems, whether that was equality or community empowerment. And lo and behold, I was able to get into the state and federal legislatures from a job perspective. But I worked on none of the cool stuff. They gave me the most boring. They're like, okay, here's the new guy. Let's go give him the boring laws, which one of them was one of the first plastic bag taxes in the United States. It was in Virginia at the time, and a bunch of angry farmers were saying, hey, these plastic bags, our cows are eating these plastic bags. We got to do something about it. And that was my first introduction to a couple of things. It was introduction to plastic waste and its larger impact into ecosystems, but more importantly, that community and advocacy is meaningful and actually can move the needle in terms of progress. But outside of that, it also taught me that policy is very slow, and I don't want to be a part of that level of speed, even though I really respect those who are part of it. And so I moved from the public service sector into the private sector, where I worked at Deloitte Consulting, and I effectively started a social innovation arm at the company, working with the now CEO of the company. And the theory was we saw a lot of things in my policy world that could make a difference, but how do we scale them to be really competitive business models that adapt with social change? So my full-time job was identifying small startups around the world, or what we at the time really were fascinated in calling them social enterprises, and helping them scale. So that took me from healthcare companies in Central America to equality organizations in Eastern Europe. I know that you have family connections into Syria. One of the projects in Syria was actually the biggest reason that I started to focus my life on healthcare. I was working in on the outskirts of Jordan right after the Syrian civil war, and I was working in a refugee camp that was helping children who lost their arms and legs in the civil conflict, and helping them basically find prosthetic arms and legs. And for me, that was a number of things. It was a recognition of how important healthcare is, but it was also a recognition of what happens to humanity when we don't address things like climate change, like war, and like civil unrest. So I, from there, took a pause on my professional career. I enlisted in the US Army to understand how do we really combat climate change when it turns into something as visual as I saw in the camps. And upon transitioning out of that, really wanted to start my own company that's centered around sustainability, healthcare, and innovation. Before I hand it to Eric, a really critical part of the healthcare side is my co-founder, who can't be on the phone today, but he is a third-generation pharmaceutical entrepreneur. His name's Achal Patel, and his grandfather built one of the first acetaminophen factories in India, which is effectively the backbone of our supply chain and how we look at the industry. We look at them as really humans and family rather than this faceless, immovable industry. And Cabinet was initially started by combining 3 generations of pharmaceutical experience with my over a decade of sustainable and social impact experience to build really the founding foundations of Cabinet Health, which is a sustainable healthcare company. But that story only starts there. I'd love to let Eric share his personal background, because as we take those foundations, really when we think about really healthcare outside of OTC, i.e. prescriptions and beyond, it's really critical how Eric and his team are really a part of that. And I'll hand it to you, Eric, and make sure that we will get back to your question, Shadi, of like, how did it all start? But it is started by people. So Eric, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. As I mentioned, I'm a second-generation pharmacist. So my parents owned and operated an independent pharmacy in a small town here in New Hampshire for about 30 years. And I remember growing up in my parents' pharmacy. They would go in on the weekends after hours to do the books and other things. And I had this little box set aside when I was a young boy, and it was just a small box of vials that my parents put aside for me that I could use as blocks. And I didn't really understand what those were at the time, but as I grew older, my first job was actually working in my parents' pharmacy as a front store clerk, doing the cashier, vacuuming the front store, and then helping restock vials. And it was at that moment that it really hit me and resonated with me. As I was carrying this big box of vials up from the storage room and putting them into their bays to fill prescriptions multiple times a day, I just realized how much waste is going out the door. And that really led me to wanting to pursue more in this field, whether it be from a prescriber standpoint or a pharmacist standpoint. Growing up, my career ultimately took me down the pharmacist route. And as I said, I currently have over 2 decades of experience. But my ultimate passion really is around sustainability here, ever since that young age. My current experience provides me with unique insight into the healthcare field, and with a particular focus on blending traditional practices with sustainable, modern digital approaches. We're really starting to make waves here at Cabinet. So excited to share more about that with you today. And Russ, I know you wanted to answer that, so I'll pass that back.
I mean, I think you both mentioned lots of words, but one of them is sustainability. What do we mean by this? Kind of dumb it down for me. When you say sustainability, what are we actually talking about?
Yeah. We look at sustainability in a very multifaceted way. When we think about it in its simplest form, it starts off with its material outputs, the carbon outputs, as well as a little bit more broadly in terms of access and being able to provide patients with ethically sourced and ethically and higher quality, more transparent products. But most concerned for us in our origin story is really the plastic medical waste. So when we think
Why?
about,
So why plastic medical waste? Because
yeah,
it's like there's so many things you could do, right? I mean, when you
sure.
talk about sustainability, especially in the healthcare, there's like gazillion things you could focus on.
Yep.
There's something specific that made you start thinking, I'm going to talk about the plastic waste and how this is actually being done in America?
Yeah, great question. I'll answer it in two ways. Number one is, what is the scale of the problem? And if we didn't exist, where would that problem go? And then second, why are we using that as our initial introduction for patients in the industry to think through sustainability? So to the first question, today, when we look at the broader plastic waste problem in medicine, there's roughly 194 billion single-use plastic medicine bottles created every single year. That's everything from your OTCs, your RX, front of store, retailers, et cetera. A vast amount of medical plastic created, not just the ones that the consumers are buying, but also the back of pharmacy. The vast majority of that plastic created is not recycled. So a conservative estimate is that 95% of that is not recycled. So on an annual basis, basically every plastic bottle, every single made, is not actually recycled. It goes into ocean landfills and in the environment. So when we think about the following that bottle along, the so what is that plastic waste has a very large ecological effect to oceans, communities, et cetera. Some clear examples is damaging the oceans, which are critical for sequestering carbon, which is critical to addressing climate change, yada, yada, yada. But if we just look at the macro issue, simple is a lot of plastic, none of it being recycled. And we think about other industries that have made some level of either meaningful progress or set meaningful sites. The healthcare industry has really not made meaningful progress when thinking about the plastic sustainability in plastic and reducing of plastic. And we'll talk about why that is over
No, no,
time.
and I actually love the notion. I guess what I'm like, what made you think of it? Like, I'm trying just to think,
Yeah,
right? I mean, I don't know, something happened, you read an article, you saw something like, I mean, it wouldn't be something I would have thought about. I mean,
yeah,
if you put the problem in context, it's a huge problem. It's a big problem. I'm glad somebody is doing something about it.
well,
I
we're really
should
excited.
not would have not thought about it at all. So I'm so curious what made you think about it.
Yeah, well, it's there's a couple of reasons, and I think number of them is it's just a constant discovery process. The more that notion is in the back of the mind, the more that we really start to look at healthcare and thinking through why is that in plastic? I think Eric's story is a prime example of kids stacking bottles, and we generally give we and there's valid reasons for this, but we give healthcare really a hall pass when it comes to material sustainability. I think post the pandemic, there are now more medical masks in the oceans than there are jellyfish. Or when we think about, the pharmacy aisles, we really don't want to touch that because of this notion of quality, this notion of care. And there's certainly a false choice. So for us, there was a moment when we were first starting Cabinet back in the day, early times. We were just trying to build a new brand, and there was a day in particular, Shadi, where we were building our first round of over-the-counter products. And I'll start by saying when we first built Cabinet, like pre even having a name, we just wanted to build an over-the-counter company that was more human, more patient-centered. And at the time, because there were no sustainable packaging, we said, let's go with plastic. So I remember the day we were making our first order of bottles, and it was the same time I was showing my now wife, then girlfriend, effectively my hometown in Singapore. And it was this convergence of like, one, our plastic bottles were a disaster. They all melted. We tried to make a unique shape. It was a total startup nightmare. And at the same time in Singapore, we had a big forest fire that was engulfing my city. And it was an initial aha moment of, I have read a lot about plastic waste and the vast majority of waste in other industries. And then thinking, well, I'm about to start a healthcare company, and we're making the same mistakes that we made in those other industries. And so even on day zero, we were like, well, this makes no sense. That it doesn't make sense to have a healthcare company that isn't also thinking about not just the health of the patient, but the health of the environment. And so from that day, we we really started to get really deep in the research, deep in the material science, and ultimately needed to invent our own packaging to be able to bring safely for over-the-counter medicines and prescriptions.
And Eric, I mean, I think we talked about, and Russ put this into context in terms of how pharmacy is using all of these plastic bottles are not recyclable. I guess my question is, as I'm thinking, if plastic is the problem, how about plastic outside of pharmaceutical and drugs? Are these not a problem because they're recyclable? Like, even like, I don't know, like the milk thing, whatever it is, anything plastic.
All things plastic are a problem overall. There's just thinking about carbon emissions in and of itself, annual output of over 400 million tons expected to double by 2040, right? And these break down into microplastics and nanoplastics, that product of the degradation of those. And they've been linked to things, and they end up they get in our bodies, right? And they are linked to things like asthma and cancer and cognitive impairment and lung disease and premature births. And they're also found in our drinking water and bottled waters, those particles. So it's important here that we take this step forward in an industry that really hasn't been touched in so long. And I'm sure you recall this too, but the pharmacy world never used to be plastic. It started as glass. And we've moved this way to reduce cost and to produce scale. And ultimately, it's hurting the population. And I really, when I first connected with Russ and Aj, their story really resonated with me. And I think that connection between myself growing up, my healthcare experience, understanding their why, it just allowed a perfect harmony between us to think about how we can really grow and scale this business together.
Eric, is there
and solve this problem? Yeah.
What data do we have? What data do we have, Eric, that shows, quote unquote, it's hurting people? I get the notion, but I think scientifically, do we have data to say, I mean, because again, if you're talking to me, I'm wondering, is there data to show pre-plastic, post-plastic, there's a difference in incidence, prevalence, whatever it is, that you can go and tell people, if we do this, we are going to reduce X, Y, and Z?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a few white papers out there, but there was a great article that was recently posted that actually proves this and shows this. It's called "There's Plastic in My Plaque," and this was a recent article. I think it was early March, where they were finding that nanoplastics and microplastics in plaque tissue itself is a breaking discovery that's raising a lot of urgent questions and finding solutions around this. Again, this is just one article, but happy to share more. There's also articles in the New England Journal of Medicine as well tied to this and talking about cancer and heart attacks and stroke and issues like that tied to plastics.
Yeah, and I'll share, there's two sides of your question there, which is, how does it affect the human body? And if we can solve it, how does it improve the environment and the broader theory of change of is reducing plastic actually supporting a quote unquote more sustainable industry in their world? And I think to Eric's point, this is one, number one, the medical science is an ongoing discipline, of which one of the most excited reasons we're on this podcast is to be able to advance that conversation with you. So I would start by saying, the broader medical science of how do plastics affect the human body is still being explored. But the science, the most recent research out of Italy was that with microplastics, nanoplastics available in the plaque and arteries of people's bodies can 4 to 5x the chances of a cardiac event. And so I think I would love to engage you in the broader medical community to understand that a little deeper, because our perspective at Cabinet is that we don't want to be alarmist. We don't want to say that, plastic waste is the only thing that the healthcare needs to improve on, but we do recognize that, having plastics in your body or anything that is not supposed to be in your body or processed in your body is probably a bad thing. And, with the only person on the phone who doesn't have a medical degree on this podcast, I think you guys are going to agree. I think with statement number one. But statement number two is that what happens if we solve for this? And And what is Cabinet's role in that? If, the way that we look at our theory of change is, as a company, we have started as an over-the-counter everyday essentials brand available in Target and CVS. We are now moving towards helping bigger companies like your healthcare companies or your big pharmacies use some of our packaging, which meets and exceeds FDA standards, to be able to bring their products to market. With Eric's leadership, we're moving to prescriptions, launched our own pharmacy, but want to be able to provide that packaging to other pharmacies like hospital systems, et cetera. And then the next journey, which we got to call you in 5 years and have that next episode. But how do we get to every part of the healthcare system to be explored upon, whether it's gowns, masks, those surgical trays that you play with? And our role as a company is, we might not solve it all, but we want to at least inspire that it's possible, so that we can
right there focus on the packaging.
For the most part, whether it's the packaging today or the actual medical device in the future. Today, our specialty is indeed like packaging, solid oral dosages in different packages. As we move further in our innovation roadmap, it'll soon include, everything you would see in a pharmacy shelf and in a hospital. And by no coincidence, our name is Cabinet. We want to make sure that medical cabinet is fully sustainable.
That is, you have a good marketing department right there.
Yeah,
but when you think of the idea, so you thought of the idea,
Yep.
you identified the problem. How difficult it is to go and pitch it? Because I presume that you had to go. I mean, I did see your video on Shark Tank and all of this, but before you even went to Shark Tank, I presume you had to go to VCs. Did you put some of your own money? Like, how do you actually even get things off the ground? Because taking the theory into reality requires a lot of financial backing. And that means you need to go on these roadshows and try to sell your idea to folks who control a lot of funding. How difficult was that? When did you start doing this? What did you learn? How often were you turned down and things like that? I think a lot of my listeners would be so curious as to that road, because it's really challenging and it's not everybody succeeds.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the thoughtful question. My perspective is that we're always evolving, and therein, like, we tend to, particularly in the US, glorify this this visionary entrepreneur that was able to kind of live in a garage, and then all of a sudden they get that big check, and then they become the successful startup. I think, as a mission-driven company, we have looked at what is success. Success is actually making meaningful progress on the problem, and then having a really successful enterprise that is able to fuel that and take care of our employees and families. So that philosophy changed the way that we did it, and I'll share that it is very hard. But when you're fighting for something that you really believe in, it's very different than fighting for something that you expect a big financial return at the end of it. But our journey was, it started off with, I worked with Ash for more than a decade, and we effectively bootstrapped the company, using some of our supply chain advantage to provide quality medicine into the market faster, and basically started our own smaller store that we used those profits to invest in research and development for sustainable packaging. Along the way, we definitely hit moments where, like, let's get some rocket boosters, let's get some advisors in the world of our company, where we found people who had and ran their own hospital systems and said, I've been thinking about this problem for a long time, or they have worked in direct-to-consumer brands and retail, and they're like, I really believe in it. So we from an investor's perspective, we are not your typical big VC-backed, pitch me this and get it going. In spite of what Shark Tank might feel, we've been really supported by incredible mission-driven investors and or operators. So if you look at our cap table today, it includes, the CEO of a hospital system, a president of a big nonprofit, people who are like, I've got a lot of money, but I'm not going to put it into just any other startup. I really want to solve this problem. And then I would say the third part of that journey is really bringing the right team. I mean, that is where I think that's the biggest litmus of, like, are we building something that's theoretical or something that can scale? So bringing in Eric and our squad throughout. For your listeners, I am more than happy to dig into any of those parts of the journey where you're like, wow, this is a tough one, but we're here now.
No, I mean, I want to ask you also about the appearance on like, some of the failures and successes.
For
Eric,
sure.
in your role in the pharmacy perspective, what's your day-to-day looks like? Like, what do you do every day? How much of this is really more of a like a pharmacist role, but like tell me how you spend your day.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Majority of my day is actually spent first, as a startup, we're lean, right? So we wear a lot of hats. So it could be 50,000 foot view one moment, really digging in, talking about strategy, understanding how we take our patient experience from where it is today into tomorrow and in the future. But the other component of it is talking to customers, answering emails, picking up the phone, really understanding what they're going through, getting to understand people, I think is extremely important in healthcare. I worked at multiple pharmacies prior, and a lot of the time is spent on heads down, right, doing the work and not lifting our head up and making that interaction and really understanding what people not only are looking for, but what they care about. And so for me, my day is pretty routine. In the morning, I have a set block where I basically go through, do my email. Generally, depending upon the day, I'll have an initial status with either a team member or a peer, just to go through on a weekly basis, understanding our roadmap, how we're progressing, understanding the metrics, how we're progressing there. Then I dig in a little bit further. It's more of a heads down time, understanding overall trends in terms of not only what we're doing from a business standpoint, but really digging into customer insights, right? What are trends that we're seeing through our interactions with customers? We capture all those. We really want to make sure that we're solving not just the sustainable problem, we're also solving a problem which exists in a lot of pharmacies today, which is patient care.
So
right?
When you talk to your customers, are your customers mainly the pharmaceutical companies that are making the drugs and they need to package the drugs, or are they more the Walgreens, the CVSs, and the independent pharmacies? Like where in the supply chain, who makes the decision on the packaging?
Yeah, it's funny you asked this question because right before Eric was just leading a full RX deep dive. So he's been on since probably 7 o'clock this morning. I'll start with the market question, and then Eric, I'd love if you could share some of the patient stories. So we work across the value chain. Our business model, while you see it on Shark Tank, it works B2B. So we sell to healthcare systems, the packaging and the finished goods. We also work at the direct to consumer level, where we have direct patients, which is really within our own cabinet RX capability. We transfer customers from an existing pharmacy over into Eric's pharmacy and his team's pharmacy. And then we have our retail partners, which is our over-the-counter products. So we sell those at Target as well as CVS, and where customers can find us on the shelves. So when we think about talking about our customers on our level, the education of sustainability has to happen on all fronts, from the C-suite to the side of procurement and all the way to the patient consumer education, because this isn't familiar to a lot of people. So a lot of the work that we do is trying to teach them about, as opposed to buying the standard plastic bottle, buying a refillable or compostable bottle. So to Eric, your day-to-day, I love hearing some of the stories that you have with like talking through patients where they start loving the packaging, and then it actually opens the doors to a lot of other conditions that they're looking to serve.
I'd like to hear, Eric, maybe an example, because I'm just thinking like patients don't have a control over the packaging. They just go to the store and they buy a product.
Yeah.
They have no control. And frankly, even if they don't like the packaging, unlikely nobody's going to listen to patients. Let's just face it. unless it's an advocacy group, a huge group, they're going to go and push. But
Right.
if I go to CVS and tell them, hey, I don't like the packaging of this, they say, tough luck. So how do you, I agree on the educational front, actually, like Russ said. I mean, there's a lot of educational component to this. But do you talk to patients a lot? Do you, is it
Do.
like, oh, so take me through like a typical conversation with the patient.
Yeah, so we actually also hold Russ and I actually hold customer insights sessions where we have a handful of patients each month that we dig into, and I think that's probably a perfect example. In one of our recent conversations with a patient, they were talking. So today we only have oral medications, non-controls in our packaging. So we have our refillable glass vial with our compostable pouch. They were talking about an inhaler recently, and they were like, every time I get my inhaler filled every month, I have to throw out this plastic piece. And that really led Russ and I to start thinking about there's our roadmap moving forward around sustainable healthcare solutions is obviously greater than just oral medications, whether it be over the counter or prescriptions. There's birth controls, there's creams and ointments, there's inhalers, there's all these different components tied to just this pharmacy space that we can unpack. And we really work with our head of operations to lean into the research and development area tied to this space. And Russ, I know that you recently traveled abroad and probably had some great insights in regards to the different types of sustainable healthcare solutions that we could bring to market.
Yeah, Eric, I think that's a great example of what you were saying is like, why not? Why just the bottle? Why not, why not the inhalers? Why not the gloves? And it's been, while one of my experiences, what I shared in Singapore, I think Eric's example is a very clear example of how we've been, as we've set the conditions for, let's try to think through the cabinet differently. We get all the time patients saying, can you do this in a sustainable packaging? And usually the answer is like, we don't know, but we'll figure it out. We got the right expertise to figure it out. In fact, when we launched prescriptions, it was purely patient initiated. We started off with.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean you launched prescriptions?
Yeah. So when we started the company, 2018, we first launched with over-the-counter medicines only. So it was over-the-counter medicines in a compostable refillable system. That was it. We sold online, we sold on Amazon, we moved out into retailers. And the thing that we kept getting back from our customers, who were customers, not patients at the time, is that, hey guys, like we've got this orange bottle. We got a lot of these things right now. Do you do this in prescriptions? And really our thought was, we've always dreamed of it, but let's give it a shot. And so Eric and Tyler Martin, who's our head of digital, pieced together a digital pharmacy capability. We went through the regulatory quality processes, and then we built it out. And then I think that these stories are continually pushing us to where else we can go. And that's how we look at the really the value of the business. Shadi, you were talking about like customers and like their education. And this is where it's been really fascinating for us on the role of sustainability for patient behavioral change, because I think it's very well understood. Patients and customer behavior is just so difficult to change, so difficult. And so we have seen sustainability, if we unpack it less higher level, in execution, it's really design. So we create a physical product that is interesting for them. It looks different. They want to put it on their medicine cabinet. So design aesthetics. 2, it's personalization. So a lot of our products, they literally will have their name engraved on it with a lot of additional communication wrappers from Eric's team. They'll say like, welcome Shadi to the pharmacy. Like, we want to onboard you. Like, what's your birthday, all that stuff. And then its third is the stickiness, that if you do believe in sustainability, you want to commit to it with some level of, I will go back to you and use my medicines or follow up on it by staying with this mission that I get incentivized to do, whether it's like our email comms or soon to be, we'll have impact points. And that's been so interesting for us. Like, we didn't really, how do we use sustainability as a way to be the front door for larger healthcare things, like whether that's medical adherence or opportunities for education on toxicity, educations on quality of medicine, and a lot to unpack there. But I'll just pause for a second.
Yeah, no, that's actually great. I want to go back just a couple of more questions. There's from a startup perspective, you're about 6 years old. I think it goes without saying that, smaller companies grow, but most startups at some point, there's a quote unquote exit strategy. Not to say you're exiting from the business, but it's either you have to get so much money to scale up the business and just go viral,
Yeah.
or you have to sell or go public, or something has got to happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
put in your business CEO hat now. I mean, forget all of the other stuff. As a business CEO hat, where do you think the company is going, to the extent you can share? I recognize you can't share
Oh
everything.
yeah. I mean, we're super transparent about this. It's a $1.7 trillion industry if we unpack everything from OTC RX medical consumables, direct to consumer, B2B, from a sustainable landscape. And we want to achieve and change the entire market. So when we look at what is success for Cabinet from a mission standpoint, we're going methodically through over-the-counter RX medical consumable and then by channel. From a business strategy for us, that's just full-on growth where we want to take on that whole pie. And so naturally, in order to do that without sounding like a overly idealistic founder, is we do need to, one, continually scale and show product market fit in each of those domains, scaling capability of each of those aspects of that massive market. So what we mean by that is really being the go-to over-the-counter medicine brand, being able to be the go-to B2B partner for our private label business, being the go-to pharmacy packaging company. And so the way that we look at it is we don't see ourselves as a focus in on just one part of that market and then scale and try to dump money on it to reach escape velocity. We look at it as build scalable, profitable units that ultimately build a broader healthcare company that can support each of the other units to scale the broader market. Now, I'll be, without being naive, like capital strategy is very important for doing that. But as a profitable business, that there are other accesses to capital to scale. So it doesn't all have to be equity or venture. It can be different, more creative models that allow us to scale, particularly as we show product market fit. So, our vision is maybe said in a different way, Shadi, like if the problem is not solved, Cabinet, whether Cabinet has solved it by themselves in its business units or its sister business units, or some market sort of enters us to be able to create a new sustainable healthcare market, then Eric and I would not have done our jobs. And so we don't want to stop until that's done.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, so you're profitable right now?
We're on a pathway for it. So when we think about by some of our investments, particularly in pharmacy, that's just not a reasonable proposition. It's not going to grow the team fast enough. But on a unit basis, and when we want, if we wanted to be profitable today, we could be, let's slow down sort of our research and development and be able to service our current patients and customers.
Yeah.
But that doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, no, it doesn't solve the problem. How nervous were you going on the show Shark Tank? Was this like, or was it like, hey, it's like I'm going to pitch to another VC, or was it?
I mean, hey Eric, if you were out there, man, it would have been ice cold veins. I'm sure you would have crushed it. Me on my side, this is my first time on TV, and we were definitely nervous. It was a fun process though. Like a lot of things I didn't know.
Eric was not with you by then, right? Eric joined the company.
Yeah,
I joined the company in June of last year. Yeah, that aired in January originally, Russ? Or was it?
Yeah, January.
Yeah.
It was a wild ride, but definitely, being honest, like definitely nervous. They bring you into this it's a really funny process. If you're ever interested, I'm happy to talk about it. But right before the show, they bring you in this like very cold white room, and you're just waiting, and they're notorious for flying out extra folks so that sometimes they fly you out and you never pitch. So you're kind of like, am I actually going to do this? Am I not going to do this? And then one other funny thing that they do that not many people know is when you walk out of that very like, iconic hallway, and you go like, this company is, focused on healthcare unfiltered. You'll stand out in front of the sharks for 30 seconds in silence, dead silence. So they tell you, they're like, hey guys, you got to stand out there until I say pitch, like nobody moves. So you just kind of look at the sharks in a very awkward, silent moment. And then they do this like panoramic shot of you. So for us, we walked out, we did our little power pose. And the next thing we know, we hear the director and producer going, what the beep? Like cut. Like, ah, Kevin, like you can't take a phone call right now. Like the guys are just pitching. And so they all like, everyone laughed on set. They basically, hey, sorry, cabinet boys, you're gonna have to go back and do it again. So we walked back and we ended up having to do it twice, which really broke the ice. But during it, honestly, there was a moment for me where I was just like, you're worried and nervous about what happens when you just get, smoked on this show and you look like a fool. The reminder for me is, number one, I have an incredible team that wasn't there, that just cares about the mission. We had a cause that we really had researched behind it, thought a lot about it, dedicate a lot of our life to it. So really when it started to be the pitch, well, there are some gotchas in terms of like just being on TV. And, in the end of the day, it was.
You guys were very convincing. I mean, I watched this. You were very convincing. I think from a completely pure thing, you nailed the financial questions. Well, not you, your partner.
Yeah. You would have, if it was just me. Yeah.
No. I mean, I guess in the last few minutes for both of you, I mean, I guess if we're having this conversation a year from now, what would be talking about? What would you be? Because we're going to have you back in a year from now.
Yes, please. We're going to have you on our podcast.
No, I really love, I mean, look, I love success stories. I love innovation. And I love ideas that come from the scratch. I mean, I think the reality is you obviously thought of a problem when you saw it and you proceeded to resolve this problem, and then you financed it, and you, like you said, product market fit. Like, what can I create a product that the market needs and move forward?
Yeah.
So a year from now, what do you think the conversation will take us?
Yeah. I'll start, and then Eric, I would love to hear your vision on the pharmacy side. Number one, I think from an industry perspective, because we're going to call you right after this podcast, I would love to advance our industry's understanding of plastics effects on the body and its effects on, in a more pointed way that is able to, one, research that, but also be able to bring medical experts and leaders like yourself, your colleagues, along with that journey. So like in a year's time, one thing that I really want to focus on with Eric and others is to bring the medical community to this problem set, to get away from just the Shark Tank components of it, which was a strategic move for us to make it a
for sure.
But to bring really thought leaders of what is the intersection of healthcare and sustainability, which is ultimately the whole, if we really simplify the purpose of Cabinet, that is why we exist. It's just to bring that divide closer together. So, in a year's time, it would be great to be able to say, we worked on this white paper, we worked on this document, and we have a series of other medical experts just talking about what's that next medical question that we have to address. From a business standpoint, though, we have a really busy year ahead of us. It is massive. I mean, in 1 year, we launched 2 national retailers. We scaled our e-commerce site. We launched an incredible pharmacy capability. And soon we're also launching a private label capability that helps bring some of the healthcare giants further in their healthcare, in their sustainability journey. And so 1 year's time, what we want to do is we're not looking to boil the ocean. I think strategically, we want to advance all of those things that we brought from 0 to 1 and make it 1 to 100. Meaning we have broader distribution in some of our retail spaces and more focused distribution on the products that are really adding the most impact. We've got a really clear way that we handle our patients and our pharmacy vision. And then we have a list of the world's biggest healthcare companies saying we stand by sustainable healthcare and we want to accelerate that. So that for me is a really good year, and we're on track to do it. And Eric, I would hand it to you on what would your vision be for next year?
Yeah, so obviously Cabinet Health is a pioneer in the space. And for me, thinking about, the next year and moving forward, it's really around setting benchmarks for what it means to deliver healthcare with a conscience, right? It's a future where eco-friendly practices are not an afterthought, but a fundamental aspect of patient care, and starting to broaden the spectrum and understanding in regards to that. And that's what we're building towards. We're striving towards a model that inspires others in the industry really to follow suit here, fostering a healthcare environment where sustainability and patient care can go hand in hand. And by remaining at the forefront of innovation and sustainability, I know that we'll continue to redefine the landscape, and ultimately craft, hopefully, a legacy here that really endures for generations to come. I think by the next year, we'll set that foundation, and looking forward to continuing to grow and drive more sustainable practices across the industry.
Well, nothing warms my heart, honestly, than seeing success stories. So I'm going to be following you closely. I'm hoping that we'll have opportunity to collaborate on a lot of these things as well. But I can't thank you enough for joining me on the podcast, and we will definitely have you back, hopefully in a year, and talk about the progress you made. Russ Gong and Eric Lessard, right? Did I slaughter your last name, Eric?
You're good, Lessard. You got it.
I'm known to do that. See, it's Lessard.
We are too, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on Healthcare Unfiltered.
Thank you so much. Excited for the book, and congratulations on the upcoming launch.